we're going to go ahead with chapter 14, talking about Caleb's inheritance. And so, yeah, I think can everyone see the share screen with the outline on it? Just shake your head or something. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right, so here we are with our timeline. We're just about halfway through here. Caleb's autobiography. Well, it's not really his autobiography. He just told a little bit about why he wanted to get the land that he wanted. So anyway, that's where we are, and let's go ahead and jump in with the first couple of verses. Now, these are the portions that Bnei Israel possessed in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the Kohen and Joshua son of Nun and the heads of the ancestral houses of the tribes of Bnei Israel apportioned to them. Their inheritance was by lot, as Adonai had commanded by Moses' hand, for the 9 tribes and half-tribe. All right, so if you were to look on in Numbers 34:19 through 28, they list all of the heads of the various tribes, but they only listed the heads of the 9.5 tribes. They did not list Gad and Reuben because, well, they already had their portion, so they would not be involved in this, the apportionment of the other lands to the other tribes, because basically it wasn't any of their business at this point, because they already had theirs. They had asked for the good fertile grazing land over on the east side of the Jordan River, and Moses said, "Yep, you can do that, but you still have to come over and help us fight," which they did for 7 years, and then they went back home to their families finally. So the things to pull out of this: Eleazar, however you want to say it, was the high priest, and therefore, he's the one. If they were casting lots, that's why they've got Eleazar in there, because he's the one that he would have the Urim and Thummim, which are the things that he put in his breastplate that was prescribed by God. And so we don't know if that's exactly how they apportioned the land. Remember, we had talked about that they would apportion the land by the according to population, for one thing, and then the other was by lots. And in some cases, the first one that got their apportionment was Judah, because he was at this point the head of all of the tribes. Okay, so I've got a map here that we'll be referring to for the next couple of weeks for the division of the Promised Land. And so you can see where the various tribes were, and you see Manasseh got the lion's share. They were very large, evidently, and are more populous than just about anybody except Judah. And something to look at is, these Philistines, those nasty old Philistines, are right over here, and those rascals are still causing trouble for Israel even today. If you notice the news, there's something like 400 rockets sent into Israel right now, and so they're saying that it was probably possibly Iranian assisted, as it were. So the people in Gaza are I think they better start holding on to their hats, because there's going to be some retribution. and possibly Iran is going to feel the strain of this. I'm not real sure, but Israel certainly has a right to defend themselves. And I don't know how I got onto that. Okay. So let's talk a minute about the Urim and the Thummim. Okay, this right here, the little white rock here, that's the Urim. You can read that, Urim, and then the black rock is the Thummim. Okay, and I don't know why in English they say Thummim, because that's a tav, and that should be Thummim. I don't know, the vagaries of English translation sometimes. But anyway, here's a paragraph from Dr. Bruce Waltke that I want to read to you, and it's Finding the Will of God. That's his book, and he was talking about the Urim and Thummim. Okay, so the priest could use the Urim and Thummim to determine God's will in a particular situation. Now, we're not sure exactly how or what the Urim and Thummim were, but the priest carried in his breastplate perhaps either two sticks or stones, one white and the other black, that would either give a yes or no answer to a specific question. Should Israel be preparing for battle, they would somehow shake or toss the sticks. If they turned up black, the Israelites would not go to battle. But if they turned up white, they would proceed into battle with the knowledge that they were in the will of God. Now, that's one form of divination that God allowed in the Old Testament. We read in Exodus 28 and 30 that says, also put the Urim and Thummim in the breastplate, so that so they may be over Aaron's heart whenever he enters the presence of the Lord. Thus, Aaron will always bear the means of making decisions for the Israelites over his heart before the Lord. So, now a lot has been made of the Urim and Thummim by the modern mystics that want to find out, okay, what's the key to the divine mind? So all sorts of explanations have been put forward, including the items that the items may have glowed, that they had secret words engraved on them, or that they were ancient artifacts with magical powers. But however, it should be noted that in 1 Samuel 28 and 6, that it tells you pretty clearly that a definite answer was not always obtainable. So it may not have been as simple as tossing two stones on the ground. And Moses never used them, okay? They were given for the high priest in aiding those who could not find God's guidance any other way. Now, some translate the Urim and Thummim to mean curse and blessing. I'd never heard that until I read this paragraph here. Others simply say dark and light. Now, that's what I had always heard. One of them means darkness and the other means light. Although the literal translation seems to be light and perfections. There is no proof that there were only two items. Now, some early rabbis believe that the Urim and Thummim were a series of stones that with Hebraic characters on them, by which the Lord could spell out a message for the high priest, kind of like a very Hebraic Ouija board, I guess. I don't know. That was an aside. That's not what this author said. However, most scholars believe them to be two sticks or two stones, perhaps precious stones that God used in a miraculous way to reveal his will. They were used for national decisions like going to war and for priestly matters. Now, the Old Testament seems to indicate that the Urim and Thummim faded from use during the early days of Israel's monarchy and are only referred to once after the Babylonian exile. This may be so because the institution of monarchy that God inaugurated, he also inaugurated the office of prophet. And the prophets now participated in God's heavenly court and communicated God's messages to the courts in Jerusalem and Samaria. Apparently, prophets who revealed God's word to the king replaced Urim and Thummim, through which he revealed his mind to the priest. Nevertheless, we still find Ezra using this device to determine the ancestry of the priests who returned from exile. And you can find that in Ezra 2:63. Now, after this, the Bible never mentions the Urim and Thummim again. God did not preserve it for his people. They are one more allowance from God to assist his people at a certain point in history. So that ends the little paragraph there. Any questions or comments on the Urim and Thummim on that paragraph? Anything at all? Okay. Now, the going back to our is just another map of the various tribes there. So going back to the fact that there were only 9.5 tribes to inherit all of the West Bank there. It's explained here again in Joshua 14:2 that Moses had already awarded 2.5 tribes their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan. Also, we have an explanation as to how that came about after one of the 12 sons of Jacob, namely Levi and his tribe, were not to receive a landed inheritance at all. God was their portion. There still remain 12 tribes, though, and the reason for that is that Joseph had 2 sons. Jacob blessed those 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and that's in Genesis 48. And so he adopted them as his sons. He says, okay, you are my sons. You are no longer just grandsons. You are my sons. So that made, instead of Joseph getting an inheritance, his 2 sons did. And so that made them equal in all ways to the other sons. And they would have, that action by Jacob was also accompanied by the disinheritance of Reuben, his firstborn, because of his dalliance with Bilhah, the one of the wives of his father Jacob. Now that meant that the double portion, which was normally what the firstborn got, it went instead of Reuben. Or he didn't get that, and that right of what they call it primogeniture, it descended then on Judah instead of Reuben, and so the rulership then of Israel, then it rested on Judah. Okay, does that make any sense? Everybody got that? Okay, let's go ahead with our verses. For Moses had given the inheritance of the 2 tribes and the half tribe across the Jordan, but he gave no inheritance to the Levites among them. For the children of Joseph became 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. They gave no portion to the Levites in the land except towns to live in, with their pasture lands around them for their livestock and for their cattle. As Adonai had commanded Moses, so Bnei Israel did, and apportioned the land. Now, they keep saying this over and over again, I guess so that everybody would get it. And, that we see here that Gad and Reuben and part of Manasseh had already received their inheritance. It was again stated that the Levites would have no inheritance other than the land outside of the cities for grazing and other kind of agriculture. They had about 1,500 feet outside the city walls, and that was not an edict of Moses. Okay, that came straight from God. That he said that their inheritance, the Levites' inheritance, would be God Himself, and the people were then to support the tribe of Levi. And also remember that Moses was also a Levite. We sometimes forget about that and figure, well, who was Moses, or what was he? Was he just this supernumerary, a super delegate? But no, he was a Levite. His ancestry was directly from the Levites. Remember, his brother Aaron was, he was certainly a Levite, and then all of the Kohens, the priests, descended from Aaron rather than from the other three brothers. And so the writer here is once more calling on the name of Moses to add legitimacy to their procedure. It's just going back to it and say, well, this is what Moses said. We're doing what Moses said, and then that's basically kind of the stamp of approval, as it were. Now, go ahead with verses 6 through 9. Then the children of Judah approached Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know the word that Adonai had spoken to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, concerning me and you. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of Adonai, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him back word as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my fellows that went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I fully followed Adonai my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have fully followed Adonai my God." All right, so Judah, he became then the first in precedent, the tribe of Judah, because Reuben was dispossessed, as it were, and put out of the picture as the firstborn. He lost all rights of the firstborn because of his misdeeds, and so Caleb now was actually the chief of the tribe of Judah. He was the man in charge of all of Judah. And so he reminded Joshua of the promise that Moses had made 45 years earlier. And if you wanted to, you could look in Deuteronomy 1:35 and 36. And this is God's promise to Caleb. It says, "Not one of these evil men," this is God speaking, "not one of these men of this evil generation will see the good land that I swore to give your fathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He will see it, yet to him and his children I will give the land that he has walked on, because he has followed Adonai wholeheartedly." So, that's a pretty ironclad promise right there, that you get it directly from God. And so, when they talk about Caleb the Kenizzite, there's that verse there, God's promise to Caleb. Caleb the Kenizzite, that's in verse 6. Now, Kenaz was evidently a descendant of Edom, but he had somehow assimilated into the tribe of Judah. And so Caleb rose to the chief of the tribe, and you see that in Numbers 13 and 14. He was born in Egypt. He survived the wilderness experience of Egypt, and then he figured very prominently in the conquest. Even at his advanced age, he was still jumping on parallel bars and doing dips. Okay, there you go. That was for you, Red. All right, and he was very, very prominent in the subjugation of Canaan. Now, his racial extraction, his ancestry, does not cast a cloud on his legitimacy as a Jew. His status was exactly the same as that of the descendants of Ruth the Moabitess. Remember that the descendants of Ruth included King David and the Messiah, and then of Rahab the harlot from Jericho. So once they became part of Israel, then their progeny, their descendants enjoyed the full Jewish privileges, even though it was through marriage. And this was the same. It was the true of Caleb. He may not have been racially a pure Jew or from the tribe of Judah, but before the Exodus, while they were still in Egypt, Caleb's father, who was a non-Israelite, he was from Edom. He married a daughter of Hur, and that's from Hur was from the clan of Caleb, the clan of Caleb, in the tribe of Judah. So that's in 1 Chronicles 2, 9, 18, and 19. So from this, it's perfectly clear that Caleb was not already in Canaan before the Exodus, nor or that the Calebites, as they were, the ownership of Hebron before Joshua, meaning that Caleb and all of his family, they were part of the Jews. They were with the Jews. They were not part of Canaan. So he was definitely from the tribe of Judah, to the point that he was the head of the tribe of Judah. So, all right. So, going ahead with our verses here. I think we're going to finish a little early tonight. So now behold, Adonai has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the time that Adonai spoke this word to Moses while Israel was journeying in the wilderness. And now behold, I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so is my strength now, for war and for going out and coming in. Now, therefore, give me this hill country about which Adonai spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, as well as great fortified cities. Perhaps Adonai will be with me, and I will drive them out just as Adonai has spoken. All right. Now, Caleb's talking about these 45 years. This and Moses mentioned of his being 40 years old. That's in when Moses sent him out with the spies. That would put him at 85 years old now, and so that's kind of the way we figure out how many years the conquest took. And Israel wandered in the wilderness of about 38 years, because we always say 40 years they were in the wilderness. Yeah, they were in the wilderness, but they weren't wandering, because they were at Sinai for a year building the tabernacle and so on and so forth. So but their wilderness wanderings, going round and round, going back and forth to Kadesh Barnea and the wilderness of Sin and back, all of that was about a little over 38 years. And the first 2 years were the tradition of the 40 traditional 40 years. They were utilized in giving the law, the construction of the tabernacle, and so forth. So the sending out of the spies evidently occurred after about 2 years had elapsed following the Exodus. And so 38 years later, when Israel entered Canaan, Caleb would have been 78 years old. And then since he gives his age here as 85, then that would allow 7 years then for the conquest of Canaan up to this point. Now, I was reading another commentator, and he came up with, this means that Caleb was, if he was 85, then the conquest was only 5 years, because he didn't allow for the year that Israel was building the tabernacle and so forth. So, and then one of the Bible commentators said this here, Joshua 10:14. Joshua 14:10 is the only statement in the book that bears on the length of time the conquest was supposed to cover. So looks like it's about 7 years. All right. So, okay, now he and Caleb and Joshua, these were the two grand old men of Israel right now, because the oldest at this point, the oldest that anybody could have been, would have been somewhere around 65 years old. Most everybody else, because everyone else died in the wilderness. And so only those people who were 20 years and younger were granted a mulligan on all of that, the business of the golden calf and the going into the wilderness and or not believing the spies and so forth. It was the spies report that they rejected. So everyone under the age of 20 was considered not an adult for making decisions like that. They didn't have a vote. And, you had to be 20 years old to go into the military in those days. And and like for our congregation, you can be a member upon being be bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, but you don't get to vote on items in the synagogue until you're 20 years old, following this precedent here. All right. So anyway, another question that came up was the Anakim. Now those were the giants. Remember those were the giants that were supposed to be in Hebron. And so the Bible does say that during the conquest, the southern campaign, they had run the Anakim out of Hebron. Well, evidently, when Israel then withdrew from that southern campaign and went up to chase out in the northern campaign, the Anakim, the so-called giants or whatever, they slipped back into the Hebron area. So it was left to Caleb to go back into battle and to run those guys off. And that's what he did. So finishing off with our verses here. So Joshua blessed him, and he assigned Hebron to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his portion. Therefore, Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he followed Adonai, the God of Israel, fully. Now, the name of Hebron formerly was Kiryat Arba, and Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. So then there's a nice little statement. It says, then the land had rest from war. So once Caleb took the land, he drove the Anakim out, and they were finally at peace. Now, here's some facts that gathered from about Hebron. It was formerly known, we know, I just said, as Kiryat Arba, and Arba again was the greatest man among the Anakim. He was there, I guess, a king or whatever. He was descended from Anak, which was they were called giants in Numbers 13:33. And so now this area is called Hebron, and it's a mountainous region about 25 miles south of Jerusalem. And in Hebron, there is that is the burial place of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob. And so then the Bible states that area became Caleb's inheritance. He was part of Judah, but he wanted that little spot there that was somehow special to him. And it's still a good area. Just to show you where Hebron is. Okay, here's Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, and there's the Dead Sea right there. And way up north is the Sea of Galilee. Okay, all right, so here is a picture of the tomb of the patriarchs. All right, so obviously somebody had done a lot of building in the intervening years. And this is there's Israel has like 8,000, if that many, Jews living in Hebron, and there's about 30 or 40,000 non-Jews living there. I'm not going to call them Palestinians because there's no such thing. But the non-Jews, the Muslim non-Jews, are constantly causing trouble for Israel in this part of the world. Okay, and I wanted to show you a picture. Now this is, okay, that is the Yatir Forest, and that's 13 miles south of Hebron. Okay, now this is still in the mountainous area, and it's named after a priest there, a Levitical town called Yatir, and they found this town in this area, and they've been excavating on it and so forth. But here, Israel has turned this desert into a forest, and it has by doing this, it has really made changes in the microclimate around that area, that this area is much cooler during the heat of the summer, and then it's still cold in the wintertime, but not as cold as if you get right from here out there to that part. And made the drive from down to Beersheba, and then over from the Dead Sea across it. I mean, that stuff is barren, hard, dry land. It is horrible. I don't know how in the world the Bedouins that are still down there with their sheep, I don't know how they can eke out a living in that desert, because the grass is just really, really sparse. And so anyway, that was just kind of a neat picture I thought I'd show you of Hebron. They still today in Hebron area grow very good grapes, and that was they say that's sort of the area where they picked up the big grape cluster that took 2 men to carry it back to make their report to Moses. So anyway, that is the lesson for tonight. I know it's short because it's only 15 verses,